The twin suns of the alien world were slowly dipping below the jagged horizon, casting long golden shadows across the cracked lands where nothing moved and nothing breathed. The ground beneath Lyra's feet felt as lifeless as the silence behind her. She kept walking, though her legs were weak and her breath was shallow, because behind her was a home that had never truly been hers. The place where she was born had no space for softness, no room for feelings, and no kindness for those who carried warmth in their hearts. In her world, emotion was considered a defect. Lyra had known since she was small that she was different. While others learned to hide every smile, every tear, every sign of care, she had found herself holding the wing of a broken bird, shielding it from the wind. That moment had changed everything. Her mother had seen. Her father had turned away. The elders had spoken, and the sentence was exile now. The wind whispered through the empty plains where Lyra wandered, carrying with it the sting of rejection and the scent of something foreign. She had no food. Her water reserves were nearly dry. The stars above her began to appear one by one as the last light faded from the sky. But she kept walking with no destination, because stopping meant surrender, and surrender was the one thing. She would never allow Lyra's skin, smooth and pale with a shimmer like silver sand, glowed faintly in the dark. Her large eyes, made for the night, searched the horizon for shelter. Her long limbs moved in slow rhythm. Each step echoed with pain and strength. She remembered her last day in the city of her kind. She had stood before the circle of judgment as they listed her faults, empathy, sensitivity, compassion. She had looked around for even one face that might hold back the verdict, but there had been only cold stares. Her own brother had lowered his gaze. Her mother had turned her face. And then the gate had opened and she had walked out alone. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time stretched thin in a place like this. The terrain began to change as she reached the outer borderlands. Strange structures stood in the distance, made of metal and wood. Machines with round legs crawled slowly across the fields. She knew what they were. Humans. The name had always carried a sharp warning in her. Society. Dangerous. Emotional. Unstable. But now she thought of that warning not with fear, but with a strange curiosity. Her energy faded fast in the weight of the journey pressed harder on her shoulders. Her knees buckled. She fell beside a large rock near a narrow stream. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her last water capsule and took the final drops. Her eyes closed against the cold night air. And in that stillness, surrounded by foreign skies and unknown sounds, she felt something stir in her chest that was not fear. It was hope. Small and fragile but real. Somewhere nearby a figure moved. A human figure. Dressed in dark fabric and thick boots, a man scanned the area with a handheld scanner. His name was Ile. He had come from a nearby station to check on damaged solar panels. He was not expecting to find anything alive in this zone. Most of the locals avoided the outer rim, but his device beeped softly and his eyes caught the shimmer of something by the rocks. He approached carefully. He saw her there, crumpled like a fallen leaf. Not quite human, not quite creature. Just something tired and alone. His first instinct was to step back. He had seen the warnings too. He had heard the stories. But then he looked closer and saw her hand clenched around a small piece of cloth, something woven and delicate. He saw the soft rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing, but barely. Eli knelt beside her. He didn't speak at first. He just looked. The alien girl had markings on her skin like stardust trails. Her face was narrow, her frame thin, almost weightless. She looked peaceful in sleep, but her body told a story of hunger and distance. He reached into his bag and pulled out a hydration patch. He placed it gently against her wrist. She flinched but did not wake. Then he saw her eyes open. Large and dark, glowing slightly in the dim light. She stared at him, unmoving. Neither of them spoke. She did not know his language, and he did not know hers. But something passed between them, a quiet recognition. He raised his hand slowly and opened his palm to show he held nothing. She blinked once, her expression unreadable, but she did not. Pulawele stayed there for several minutes. He did not know who she was or why she was here, but he could see that she needed help. He activated his cum and called in a soft voice to the station. He said there was a situation, that he had found someone, that he was bringing her back. As he helped her to her feet, she leaned on him, weak but not afraid. She did not know what waited ahead. She had been told humans were violent and cruel. But this one had given her water. This one had not turned his back. As they walked together toward the distant lights of the human outpost, the sky above them stretched wide and endless. And though she had lost everything, though she had been cast out by her own kind, a part of her believed that something new had begun. A path not written by fear or control, but by choice and connection. A story not of survival alone, but of something more. Hope had brought her this far. And now, for the first time, it was no longer silent inside her heart. The human outpost stood between the wild land and the edge of structured civilization, where metal walls met soil and silence, and every noise felt like it echoed forever in the air around them. It was not a grand place, but it was solid and warm, and held the kind of life that could survive on a planet not fully tamed. As Eli helped the alien girl through the gates, he could feel the weight of many eyes watching from windows and doorways, though no one stepped forward or spoke. Lyra walked with careful steps, her movements slow, her gaze sweeping across the foreign world around her, where everything was sharp and strange, but not threatening inside. The outpost, a room had been prepared, one not used in many cycles, meant for injured workers or lost travelers who rarely came this far. Ale placed a warm blanket on the narrow bed and brought a bowl of nutrient paste, placing it on the table without speaking. Lyra sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her knees, unsure of what to do next. She looked at the bowl, then back at Eli, and for a long moment, there was nothing but stillness between them, like two pages from different books placed side by side. Eli pointed at the bowl, then made a motion of eating. Lyra understood. She lifted the bowl and took a slow sip, and though the taste was unfamiliar and heavy, she accepted it without complaint. He watched her for a while before sitting on the chair across from her and opening a small device from his belt. It projected soft lights and simple symbols. He touched one, and a human word echoed softly through the room. He repeated it again and then pointed to himself. Eli. She tilted her head slowly, repeating the sound. Not perfectly, but close enough. Then she placed her hand on her chest and said, Lyra. It was the first true moment between them, a bridge built from nothing but sound and trust. Eli smiled. Lyra did not know the meaning of the gesture fully, but something inside her softened. Outside the room, others gathered, curious and uneasy. A woman named Mara, who managed communications, stepped forward and whispered to Eli through the open door. She asked who the girl was, where she came from, what she wanted. Eli answered only what he knew, that she was alone, that she was weak, that she needed safety. The others looked at one another with tight faces and cold questions. They reminded him of the warnings and the old rules that humans and aliens should keep apart, not for fear of violence, but because peace was built on distance and control. Eli listened but did not agree. He had seen something in Lyra's eyes that no scanner could read, something honest and ancient, something human. Lyra heard their voices, though she could not understand the words. She felt the shift in tone, the sudden rise and pause. She looked down at her hands, thinking about her own people, how quickly they had judged her, how fast they had turned her into a stranger. Was this to be repeated again among these new beings, or would this place become different? Later that evening, Eli returned with a small tray of items. A datapad with visual language tools, a cup of warm liquid, and a soft scarf dyed in the blue of the evening sky. He handed her the scarf without saying anything. She held it for a moment, then wrapped it gently around her neck, understanding that it was not meant for function, but for care. He pointed to the datapad and began tapping on images, one after another, showing a tree, then a sun, then a hand, then the word for help, then the word for friend. Lyra watched with quiet focus and began mimicking the patterns, slowly matching each image with the sound, learning not just words, but meanings. Time passed in hours that felt like days. The light outside the window shifted from orange to purple, to deep blue as the moons rose into the sky. Inside the room, Ely and Lyra sat together on the floor beside the datapad, sharing names for things, sharing small smiles when understanding was found. She pointed to the stars and said a word in her own tongue. He repeated it back imperfectly, but she laughed not with mockery, but with joy. Ely brought her a map showing the regions around the outpost. Lyra pointed to a wide empty stretch near the sharp mountains, and then to herself. That was where she had come from. That was where they had left her. Ely did not ask more, but his silence was heavy with thought. He could see how far she had traveled alone, how far she had fallen from the life she once knew. As night deepened, the outpost settled into sleep, but in that small room, something remained awake, a thread growing stronger between two very different souls. Lyra sat by the window, looking at the moonlight on the ground below her feet, no longer trembling. Ayla rested in the chair, eyes half closed, but ready if she needed anything. There were no words spoken for a long while, only quiet breaths, and the hum of the station's life systems. Somewhere beyond the hills, machines stirred and watchers took note that one of the cast-outs had not perished in exile. Messages were sent silent and swift. The elders would not be pleased to know that she had found shelter among the humans. But that threat had not yet arrived. For now there was only the present moment, held in warmth and soft lights, where one alien girl and one human man had crossed a line that many believed should never be crossed. They had not done it with violence or fire, but with food, water, and the courage to speak a new word. Friend, and even though danger still waited in the shadows of her past, for the first time Lyra felt that she had not been saved, she had been chosen. Days passed slowly inside the quiet walls of the outpost, where every morning began with golden light seeping through steel windows, and every night closed with the hum of sleeping machines echoing through metal halls. Lyra woke each day before the humans, stirring gently like a flower unsure of the sun's warmth, and every time she opened her eyes, she looked around and felt something growing in her chest, something she did not have a name for yet, but something that made her heart feel lighter than before. She was no longer counting her footsteps, she was no longer measuring her breath. She was simply being, and this simple act had become a gift. Ely brought her new words every morning, written in soft script beside pictures of trees and clouds and hands reaching toward each other, and she repeated the words back slowly, then faster, until her voice grew steady and familiar with the sound of their meanings. They no longer needed the datapad to speak. They could talk now in broken phrases and shared looks, and when words failed, their silence held enough to carry the meaning across. He showed her the machines he worked with, the solar panels, the broken drones, the little gardens that humans tried to grow in patches of artificial soil, and she followed him everywhere, asking questions in her own soft voice, sometimes pointing, sometimes drawing shapes in the dust. Ely answered each question with patience, his words plain, his tone kind, and Lyra listened with the wide eyes of someone who had never been allowed to ask before. One day they sat near the edge of the outpost, watching the sky fade from silver to blue, and Ely began to speak about Earth, the place where he was born. He spoke of oceans so wide the stars drowned in them, and forests that breathed with life, and cities that never slept, and people who danced just because they could. Lyra listened to every word, her mind painting images brighter than anything her home had ever allowed her to imagine. She had known only order, silence, obedience, and now she was hearing of a world that moved with feeling and sound and chaos, and somehow that chaos sounded like freedom. When she finally told him her story, she used few words, but each word held the weight of years. She had felt different since she was young, had felt emotions that her people did not understand, and when she tried to hide them, they only grew stronger. She once cried when a creature was hurt, and that moment had marked her. Her people watched her more closely, and when she showed compassion again, they accused her of softness, and when she begged them to understand, they cast her out without hesitation. Eli did not interrupt. He sat still, eyes fixed on hers, not with pity, but with understanding. He knew what it meant to feel alone among your own. That evening he gave her a small wooden token, with a symbol carved into its surface, a symbol for safe passage used in old Earth times. It was not valuable in currency, but held meaning in heart. He told her it was hers now, that no matter where she went from here, she was not walking alone anymore. She closed her hand around it and nodded once slowly with gratitude that filled her like warmth in winter wind. Others in the camp still watched with unsure eyes. Some still kept their distance, their fear built not on cruelty, but on habit. Yet they could not ignore what was happening before them. They saw Eli smile more often. They saw Lyra helping in the gardens, adjusting broken wires, learning to fix drones. She was not just surviving. She was becoming part of something. Slowly, one of the older engineers offered her a tool to hold while fixing a pipe, and then a medic asked her to help pass supplies, and little by little the circle around her grew, until it was no longer strange to see her sitting at a shared table or standing beside the others during evening meals. But peace never goes unnoticed. Far beyond the border, where the signal towers fade and the desert takes over, there was a silent watcher receiving updates from unseen eyes. A shadow agent of Lyra's people had followed the old signals and tracked her movement, and now he stood before the elders with news that she had been taken in by humans, that she had not died in exile, that she was living among them, learning from them, growing into something they feared most. A bridge, a link, a symbol. The elders did not speak for a long while after hearing this. Then one of them stood and gave the order. She must be retrieved, not saved, not punished, removed, because her presence among the humans risked everything they had built. She could spread ideas. She could spark rebellion. She could awaken others who had been silently feeling what she had once felt back. At the outpost, Lyra woke from a quiet dream and looked out the window, feeling a strange pull in the air. She did not know why, but the sky looked heavier that morning, as if it held something it had not yet spoken. Eli was already up, working outside the main gate, and when she joined him he smiled as always, but she noticed his eyes seemed thoughtful, as if he too felt the quiet shift in the wind. They did not speak of it, not yet, but both of them sensed it. Something was coming, something that would test the bond they had formed. But neither of them would back away now, because in their hearts they had crossed the lines drawn by fear, and they had built something no rule could erase: trust. And trust was not made of words or rules. It was made of choices made again and again, even when the wind turns cold. The morning light touched the land, softly, but the silence in the air carried weight, like the breath before a storm, and though the sky looked calm, the ground beneath the outpost felt different, as if the soil itself knew that something had begun to move. Lyra stood beside the small garden, brushing dust from young leaves, her fingers gentle, her eyes watching the hills beyond the border, her heart steady but alert. Ele was nearby, working on a communication tower that had gone silent the night before. And though his hands were busy, his mind kept circling back to the quiet hum of unease that had settled over everything since the previous evening. He had felt it first as a low buzz in the equipment, then as a sudden pause in the airwaves, and now as a stillness in the animals that normally chirp from nearby rocks. Lyra noticed it too, not through machines or screens, but in the way her skin reacted to the wind, as if her body remembered the presence of her people even before her eyes could see them. She had not spoken about this feeling to Eli yet, but deep within her something told her that they were close now, the ones who had once cast her out, the ones who would not let her be free. And she knew why they had come. Not because they wanted her back, not because they regretted what they had done, but because they feared what she had become. A bridge that dared to stand between two worlds, a soul who had chosen compassion over control by. Late afternoon, a signal was picked up by the tower, a sharp pattern unlike the usual frequencies. Ale listened carefully, his brow tightening as he decoded the message. It was not human. It was a direct command written in the language of Lyra's kind, and it was cold and final. Return the outcast immediately or face the consequences. There was no plea, no explanation, only a demand. Eli read the message twice, then looked at Lyra, who stood behind him, quiet but not surprised. She nodded once, a silent confirmation that this moment had always been waiting for her, and now it had arrived. Eli gathered the others in the main hall, a group of 15 humans, each with their own thoughts, fears, and memories. Some had barely spoken to Lyra before, some had worked beside her in silence, some had begun to trust her without even realizing it, and now they all stood facing a decision they had never imagined would come to them. Eli explained the situation with calm honesty. He told them who she truly was, where she had come from, why she had been exiled, and why her people now wanted her returned. The room fell into a deep quiet until Mara finally spoke, asking what they would do next. Her voice held concern but not hesitation. Eli did not raise his voice. He simply said, "She is one of us now. She worked beside us. She learned from us. She never brought harm to anyone here. We took her in, and now we must decide if we stand by that choice or turn away." Another worker spoke, a younger man who had once questioned her presence. He admitted his doubts but also shared how he had seen her rebuild. A damaged sensor when no one else could fix it, how she had given her portion of water to a child when supplies ran low. He said he had not expected to care, but somehow he did now. One by one, others shared small moments, small reasons that had quietly built their connection to the one they had once called outsider. Outside, the sun began to drop lower, casting longer shadows across the outpost, and from the edge of the desert, the first shapes appeared, dark figures in metallic robes, moving with perfect rhythm. They did not rush, they did not hide. They walked with the authority of those who believed they would not be refused. There were 6 of them, each armed not with weapons, but with the weight of law. Lyra stepped outside before anyone could stop. Her standing still between the garden and the gate, her eyes locked on the ones who had turned her into nothing. She did not run. She did not speak. She simply waited. Eli came beside her, not with a weapon, but with his presence. The others followed slowly, standing behind them, forming a quiet wall of resistance, not with anger, but with decision. The leader of the alien group stepped forward, his voice low and sharp as he addressed Lyra without even looking at the humans. He said her presence among them was unnatural, her survival a mistake, and her return necessary for the balance of their society. Eli stepped forward and said she would not go anywhere unless she chose to, and she had already made her choice. The alien leader turned his gaze to Eli for the first time and said humans had no right to interfere with the laws of another world. Eli responded not with anger, but with truth. He said laws that punish kindness are not laws worth respecting, and any people who fear compassion must ask themselves what they are truly trying to protect. Lyra said nothing through all of this, but her eyes never left the faces of her former people. She saw no remorse, only control. She felt no sorrow, only clarity. She did not belong to them anymore. She belonged to the life she had begun to build here, where her voice was heard, where her thoughts were not crimes, where her heart was not a defect. The standoff stretched long into the golden hour, and then the alien group finally stepped back, not with acceptance, but with calculation. They said nothing more, only left a final warning that peace comes at a cost and choices have consequences. They turned and walked back across the sand, their figures fading into the glow of the horizon, and though they left without violence, the message remained heavy in the air. The humans said nothing for a while, each returning to their work, their homes, their thoughts, and Lyra stood quietly at the edge of the outpost, watching the sun as it touched the farthest hills. Eli came to her side and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. He did not speak. He did not need to. The message had been clear. They would stand together, not because it was safe, but because it was right. And now the bond between them was no longer quiet, no longer hidden. It was alive, visible, and stronger than fear. The stars above the outpost glowed brighter than usual, as if they were watching silently from far away, witnessing the story that had begun in silence, and now moved forward with voices that no longer hid. The night was long but peaceful, filled with a kind of stillness that comes only after something important has passed, and everyone in the camp felt that stillness within their hearts. The encounter with the alien envoys had changed something deep inside them. It had pulled a veil away from the truth and left behind the simple question of what kind of people they chose to be, and most of them now carried the answer like a light. Inside, Lyra woke before the dawn once again, but this time her steps were no longer cautious, her breath no longer held doubt, her hands moved with purpose, and her eyes looked toward the future, not the past. She stood beside the same garden she had once watched quietly, and now she touched the new leaves with gentle fingers, checking the growth of the green stems, adjusting the soil with the care of someone who had learned that every small life deserved protection. She no longer needed to ask for a place among the humans, because they had already made room for her, not with loud words, but with shared work and shared time, and the quiet trust that grows stronger than anything built from fairy light joined her just as the first golden light began to touch the edge of the metal walls, and for a moment, they stood side by side without speaking, just watching the day rise together. He handed her a small datapad containing a message that had arrived during the night, a signal sent by an independent communication channel, one not controlled by her former people. Lyra opened the message and read slowly, understanding each word and letting the meaning settle deep in her thoughts. It was from a young worker from her homeland, someone who had been watching quietly from the shadows, someone who had seen what happened during her trial in exile, someone who had begun to question the rules that shaped their world. The message was simple but powerful. It said, "Your choice has reached us. We are beginning to see more clearly. We are listening." Lyra looked at Eli, and for the first time, her eyes did not just hold sadness or survival. They held strength, the kind that is born only through pain and hope woven together. She asked if the message could be answered, and he nodded without hesitation, setting up the link so that her voice could reach beyond the stars. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with care, not to argue, not to fight, but to share her journey from exile to belonging, from silence to voice. She told them how she had been called broken, but found herself whole, how she had been feared, but found understanding, how one act of kindness had opened a path wider than any rule or law could ever allow. Her message ended not with demands, but with a simple truth spoken from the heart, that compassion is not weakness, and those who feel deeply do not break. The world they builded. As her words traveled into space, reaching ears that may or may not be ready, she turned back to the life she had created and began walking through the camp, checking systems, speaking with the others, helping repair broken equipment, and laughing softly when someone made a small joke. She was not treated like a guest anymore, nor as an outsider. She was part of the rhythm of the place, as natural as the rising sun and the falling dust. The children in the camp no longer looked at her with wonder or fear. They ran to her, asking for help with their toys or sharing strange drawings, and she smiled and knelt beside them and listened as if every small word mattered. Eli watched her from a distance, now and then feeling a quiet pride, not for what he had done, but for what she had become. He had not saved her. He had simply offered a hand when she was falling, and she had done the rest. She had risen and taught them all something they had forgotten, something rare and powerful. Other camps began sending messages, curious about the girl from another world, the one who had stayed, the one who had changed everything without force or threat. Some asked if she could visit, some asked to send their own to learn from her, and the outpost that had once been quiet and unnoticed began to grow into a place where connection was valued more than walls. As the seasons changed the garden she once tended alone now, stretched wide with many hands caring for it, and the crops grew strong and healthy. New structures were built, new tools shared, and knowledge flowed freely between species that had once avoided each other. The memory of the warning from her people remained, but it no longer held power, because fear cannot grow where trust is planted and compassion is watered with courage. One evening, as the moons began to rise, she sat beside the same stream where Ely had first found her all those weeks ago, and now the air around her felt warmer, the ground beneath her feet, no longer cold with exile, but soft with peace. She looked up at the stars and felt them no longer as distant watchers, but as paths waiting to be walked, as voices waiting to be heard, and in that quiet moment, she did not feel like the alien girl anymore. She felt like someone who had come home, and Eli sat beside her in silence, and together, they watched the sky, not needing words because the journey they had walked had already said everything. The outcast had become the bridge, and the bridge had become the future, and the future now belonged to them all. The end.